Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the show. If you're new here, this is the Cut It Out podcast. I'm your host, the Red Wizard. This is a podcast all about paper crafts and collage. And today we have our first comic-centric guest. His name is Harry Nordlinger. Harry Nordlinger is an artist, cartoonist, and illustrator from San Francisco, California. He does commission work for bands, theaters, and other local businesses, as well as he's self-publishing his own comic series called Vaccum, Decay, and it's super creepy, and I love it, and that's what got me introduced to Harry's work. Now, before we bring Mr. Nordlinger in here, I have to do my shameless plug. If you like the show, please like and subscribe. I'm trying to make these shows as helpful as I can for everybody. I know a lot of us out there are learning, trying to get better at our art and our craft. And that's what I'm here to do. So please like and subscribe. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, I have an Amazon affiliate store on my website. You're probably making arts and craft stuff already. So get your supplies from my Amazon associate stores. Jeff Bezos I told me if I sell $4 trillion worth of glue sticks, I get to go on his spaceship and go to the area around the Earth and then come back down almost immediately. So yeah, buy some glue sticks. And I also have a store if you need posters, psychedelic prints, some other merch, zines, stuff like that. Holidays are coming up. Buy something weird for your friends. All right, let's get Mr. Nordlinger in here.
Hey.
Hey, how's it going? Oh, I forgot this. Hey, so I feel like I totally butchered your introduction. So
no, I don't think so.
So
everything sounded right to me.
Great. Well, I have to thank you for reawakening my love for comics, and I am blaming you because over the past month or so, I've been going through comics, learning about zines. That's kind of what started it. Was I was making zines, and I finally went to like this hip comic shop, Gutter Pop in Buffalo, and I was picking up some stuff, and I was like, okay, yeah, comics are cool. And it wasn't until I read yours that it reminded me of some of like the real edgy, crazy black and white comics that probably shouldn't have been in my hands when I was like, 11 or 12 years old. And I was like, oh shit, this is really what I was into when I was younger. So thank you for making a very, very strange comic.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. It's sick that you found me at Gutter Pop. That place rules. I haven't actually been there in person because I've never been. Those guys are really sick. Can I ask, did you just find Vaccum Decay on the shelves, or was it recommended?
Somebody, I believe someone recommended it. But then like also someone told me about Acid Nun. My friend Tom.
Oh shit!
Like,
yeah.
I think we were like softball. He was like, I got this really weird comic, and but I think by the time I asked about Gutter Pop about Acid Nun, they were like, oh well, that's in like Vaccum Decay. What was that, issue 2?
Issue 2, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it already had the first one, the first issue of Vaccum Decay.
Oh, wait, no, issue 3 actually. My bad.
Is this the first issue here?
That's issue 1 right there. Yeah,
issue 1. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if we need a trigger warning, but trigger warning: Vaccum Decay is is a horror comic, and we probably will eventually talk about some, I don't know, spooky or gory things eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how I believe it was recommended to me before Acid Nun, though, because I went in and I was like, I like sci-fi, I like horror stuff. Let me know what I should get. And so one of the guys at the shop recommended Vaccum Decay.
Fuck yeah. Well, I'm really glad you found me. That's rad.
So let's see. I got lots of questions here. So for those of us out there, and there's probably a bunch who only think of comics as superheroes punching bad guys in the face, could you briefly tell us about some of the more like indie comics or self-publishing comic scene? Like, can you tell us more about that scene at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a very different scene at different times, but basically when I was a kid, I got really into comics through first like Calvin and Hobbes and Garfield and stuff when I was like really young. And then like 9, 10, I got really into Spider-Man and shit. But then when I was 12, I discovered Daniel Klaus.
Mhm.
And at the same time as I discovered him, I discovered Johnny the Homicidal Maniac. I don't know if you've ever read those.
No, I haven't.
And those were like really eye-opening for me because the first time I realized that comics, with Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, it was the first time I realized that comics could be super fucked up and gory and like outsider art to a degree.
Sure.
In a really weird way and could really like push the envelope. And then Daniel Klaus was the first time I realized that comics could be like kind of high art to a degree. So that was my introduction to indie comics. From there, I went like way down this whole deep rabbit hole, discovered what is, as far as I can tell, the first big indie boom in comics from the late 60s, early 70s, what was called the underground comics with an X movement.
Okay.
Which is also near and dear to my heart because it's local to San Francisco.
Cool.
So basically, in like the late 60s, Robert Crumb in Spain are like the most known guys. But all these like these weird outsider artist dudes were making these like fucked up pornographic and violent parody comics that were sold in like head shops and, you know, DIY spaces and music venues, record stores, as opposed to being sold on newsstands, which is where superhero comics were sold.
Sure.
And that led to this huge boom, which then culminated with the founding of the first ever comic book shop, which was Gary Arlington's San Francisco Comic Book Company.
Huh.
So indie comics kind of created comic book retail as a medium.
Whoa.
From there, it became really popular. All those guys are now iconic, specifically like Vaughn Bodie and other dudes from that movement. But then again, in the 80s, it had a second revival with Raw magazines, kind of what you could call like the prime mover of the 80s indie scene. That's where Mouse was first serialized.
Sure.
It's also where like Charles Burns and Gary Panter got their first starts. Okay. Art Spiegelman was the editor and publisher of that. And that's separate from where the 60s is like outrageous and offensive and pornographic. The 80s black and white movement is a little bit more artistic and stylized and a little bit more punk.
Okay.
At the same time, you have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is the other huge linchpin in indie comics history, because that was the most successful indie comic that had ever been made at the time. It was like a runaway success. It was as big as Spider-Man or Superman, but it was just two dudes self-publishing. And that like showed the world, or the world of comics, that you could be a successful cartoonist just putting out amateur indie black and white stuff, which then led to, you know, the huge, what they call the black and white boom, which is where all these cartoonists started making their own. A lot of them were straight up Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles ripoffs, like a lot of aggressive ripoffs, but you also have stuff like The Crow or Faust or all these other things that would come out of that would be successful in their own way, and kind of launched the idea of self-publishing comic books as like a career, which then also then grew into Image Comics in the early 90s, which, as much as I think Image Comics from the 90s is terrible, it's, from a business perspective, it is like an important moment where indie comics are now establishment. Like, they're no longer on the outside, they're now part of the mainstream.
And from what I understand, that Image, and that was an awesome rundown.
Sorry, that was really long-winded.
No, that was fantastic. So the first thing I wanted to say was, for anyone who thinks that comics aren't avant-garde enough for you, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is about a bunch of, you know, turtles that got the ooze on them, and then they became these fighting ninjas or whatever. And it's so funny to think that something that basically was almost like this back alley comic book turned into this like huge commercial success. And, you know, a few years later, Vanilla Ice and Ninja Turtles 2, Secret to the Ooze is rapping in the movie. Do you remember that?
It literally changed the face of comics and also like pop culture at large. I didn't, like, to be perfectly honest, I wasn't like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fan growing up. Yeah. It's not until I became an adult and really dove into comic book history that I appreciate it for what it is. Like, it wasn't something that I grew up with, but now I can look back and be like, oh, that's like fundamental in the development of comics as a medium.
And then you mentioned Image, and I'm like, I've been following the Comics Kayfabe channel with Ed Piskor, and what's the other guy's name?
Jim Rugg.
Jim Rugg. Yeah, I just signed on to his Patreon. I probably should know his name if I just signed on to his Patreon. But anyway, the cool thing, what I'm learning about Image Comics that's when I was really into comics, was like when Spawn first came out. And it sounds like that, like, it's a cool story for an artist, as Seth MacFarlane was illustrating for Marvel, and he made Spider-Man #1, which was this huge success. And then around that time was this other speculator boom in comics, where you have like a million issue ones of all these like super overly rendered comic book artists with like
the literal worst era in comic book history.
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking through like thousands of them today. You know, like I think of like, I don't want to knock comics, but like when I think of things like Youngblood and stuff, where there's all these like really over the top looking characters that's all they are, is like a hyped drawing. That there's like nothing to them.
A commodity. That was the downside. So the black and white boom happens, and then the downside of that is the speculator boom, which is then comics as a commodity. It's kind of like what's happening with NFTs right now, which also Todd McFarlane's on board with, where it's like this comics are no longer an art form, they're an investment, which panned out for nobody except for the creators. Like,
it sounds like a lot of actual like comic book people. Like,
it was bad for shops. It was bad for fans. I mean, it's bad. It was not a good time. And it's funny because like
I had to get out of Magic the Gathering was people are like prospecting cards and buying like hundreds at a time, and you have to spend hundreds of dollars just to make a deck that can actually compete with other people. But that's a whole other
I also gave up on Magic because I couldn't afford the Sliver Queen, and I was like, what's the point of having a Sliver deck if you can't get Sliver Queen?
There you
anyway,
go.
Another story. But Image, the founding of Image is like a huge victory for artists and creators, because it was the first time that like they got rid of the editor-publisher role and were just like, the artists and the writers own this. There's no Stan Lee who's going to cash in on your product. You own it. And that's huge. And that is now kind of a standard that any good publisher should stick to. A lot don't, and they're kind of not looked at very fondly. But if you watch Kayfabe, the Jim Rugg at Piskor channel, they have a lot of real nostalgia for early Image, and they kind of look at Todd McFarlane and Rob Liefeld with some reverence and some like, rose-colored glasses. I do not see it. I don't understand where that comes from. I really think it's terrible.
Yeah, there's a ton of there definitely is a ton of nostalgia there, and I also see like we could bring up another '90s comic giant, Alan Moore. I knew about Alan Moore's work. I mean, he made The Watchmen. He made League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, right? V for Vendetta. These are things that are like part of like the human psyche pretty much at this point. And Alan Moore.
This is my Alan Moore shelf. All of this is Alan Moore.
Oh, awesome. That's quite a collection. Alan Moore heavily influenced artists that heavily influenced me, and they're not comic book artists at all. A friend of mine said, hey, check out Alan Moore video about, I think he called it like Idea Space or something. And basically Alan Moore is like a practicing ceremonial magician. Yeah. And so he practices magic, and he believes art is magic, really, and that we could change people's consciousness through writing and drawing. But I also see that he takes like a very left brain approach to creating. When the Comics Kayfabe guys are talking about making comics, they talk about like tons of research and actually making a map and like figuring out where your characters are in the story. And there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into these stories that I think a lot of people don't even know. My first glance at The Watchmen, I saw that Rorschach is like walking in the street, and the moon's in the sky. And as I'm looking through the panels, I'm like, dude, the guy's got the shadow right of the moonlight on like every single panel. like every single drawing, like the angle of the moon is perfect, like no matter where he is. And I was like, dude, I actually put it down because I'm trying to learn about comics and like practicing, like making my own strips right now. And I'm like, it will be crippling if I try to, the level of craft and Alan Moore's comics, or I can't look at that right now.
Yeah. No, it's if you try to like jump way ahead of yourself, and that stuff will always, that's like, if you're picking up an instrument and then you listen to Bach and you're like, I'll do this, you're not going to be able to. And that's, I wonder if those elements are, because Dave Gibbons, the artist for Watchmen, is obviously a genius, but also Alan Moore is very much like the Stanley Kubrick of comics, where he oversaw every single detail and he like notated and mapped out. I guarantee you, the moon, the shadow following the position of the moon was like Alan Moore. I guarantee you he has his fingerprints on that. Like that's, he's one of the few writers where it's like he's not just the writer. He's like the overseer. He's like the band leader for those comics. Yeah, so, he's also a guy who I discovered around the same time as Daniel Klaus, and he was also a huge influence, obviously.
So let's take it back to the comic book shop. I think it's really interesting to know that this need for, in a way, this need or want for these offbeat comics that couldn't be just sold on like the Marvel racks at the newsstand, they needed a shop. And so you have a first comic book shop, and I know I would not know about your comic and many other really cool and offbeat comics if it wasn't for the comic book shop. So now we're talking like a different scale. So like your current project, Vacuum Decay, is that a self-published comic?
Yeah, and I do it all. Edit.
Can you tell us a bit about that process? Because a lot of people listening are probably, deal a lot with, paper, ink, paint, stuff like that. And I know I personally am not into the digital stuff. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your process of like how you actually make Vacuum Decay.
Well, it's funny. So it's funny you should ask, because I literally spent the whole day formatting, because I'm about to print issue 4, hopefully next week. So I spent the whole day formatting. This is my little key. Basically, I got all the pages from all the artists, and I tried to figure out what order they're going to go in. And I also have to make sure that it's divisible by 4, because each paper is 4 sides, So comic book has to be divisible by 4 pages. So I make sure I have enough art, and then I map out whose page goes where. And then I was all day on Photoshop just fitting everybody's pages into the same 11 by 17 format. So I tell everyone to work 11 by 17 so that they all just fit perfectly, but people don't. They have their own thing, or they're giving me art that they've done previously that's on a different format. So I got to format it all. Then I put it all on a PDF, and then all that's fine. It's like busy work, but it's what has to be done. Then I'm going to tomorrow or the next day send it off to the printer, and hopefully doesn't cost an arm and a leg, but this is the longest issue I've done, so there's a chance it'll be very expensive. Also, there's a paper shortage right now, so I'm a little concerned. Yeah, there's like a global paper shortage, and it's affecting comic book publishers a lot. So I'm concerned that I might have a delay in printing.
Someone's got to call Agent Michael Scarn. I don't know if you're an Office fan.
I also get it printed on newsprint, which is like in high demand with indie publishers, and so that's often out of stock or backed up.
A particular paper?
Yeah, the newsprint paper that I print the interiors on.
I noticed your paper is like it's a little bit thicker though, right? When I think of newsprint, it's quite thin.
It's not real newsprint. That's something that a lot of snobs get really. My friend Pat Rooks, who was in issue 2, who's a really great cartoonist. He's a real paper head. He bought legit newsprint and aged it in the oven and printed his own comics on newsprint. And then he got my comics on fake newsprint, and he's like, "This is bullshit. This isn't real newsprint." And I'm like, "That's fucking cool." I couldn't tell the difference, but that's cool that you know that. So
he wanted to cure his paper so it would look like it was an older comic?
I don't know what the point of putting it in the oven is, but he did he went way out of his way and did way more work than I would have done to make sure his comics were printed on legit newsprint. Okay. As opposed to the fake newsprint that I use. Because old comics, from basically before the 80s, were all printed on newsprint. And that's why they have this specific texture. They're not glossy. the colors kind of sink into the gray paper.
Mhm.
And then you look at a new comic, and it's like very glossy sheen, white, and it's not my favorite look. And you'll see when they reprint, if they reprint like Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko Spider-Man, if they do modern reprints, they'll print it on glossy white paper, and it's just the colors are too bright. It's just a little bit off.
Yeah, I've been paying very close attention to the paper varieties because I've been making collages with comics. That's how this whole like rabbit hole, that's where this rabbit hole is taking me. So like here's a collage comic I'm making now.
Damn, that's sick.
Thank you. So I'm hoping like comic book people will be able to look at certain parts and be like, it's already happened on Instagram. People have said, oh, that's like so and so from Spider-Man or whatever. My favorite Easter egg in this one is the guy from Star Trek's Next Generation's visor.
Right. That was from a Star Trek comic.
Yeah. I buy him the comics in bulk. So I'm sitting on about 400, maybe 500 comics right now that I've gotten just in a few weeks, just basically like kind of junk bins. And yeah, I noticed that when I was first kind of bin diving that there was some time, maybe in like the early 90s, that's when the paper switches to a more like smooth, brighter paper. And
it's also when the whole aesthetics of comic switched.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah. That's definitely what I'm seeing. And then, so you work with black India ink, is that or marker? What do you draw with?
I'll show you. I've fucked with a lot of different inks, but straight up PH Martins, dude. That's what's up. I've gotten suggestions for other shit, and I don't fuck with it. My girlfriend got me this really, sorry to just show off stuff. My girlfriend got me this really cool vintage inkwell that I've been using.
It looks like it stores Melange.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm actually going to see Dune after this for a second time.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I just watched this.
Is that water-based or alcohol-based ink?
It's all water-based.
Okay.
And it's just like I just use that and a brush. I also have some nice little brush markers for detailing and stuff. I'm not a brush expert or a pen expert. I'm still kind of fucking around. I really like this brush my buddy Carmichael got me. It's called Yusutake, and these pens called another Japanese name. But basically all my pens are Japanese now. And and I really like the current setup I have. But it took me years to figure out specific like ink brush pen combo.
So when we're talking about old school comics, not even just independent ones, were a lot of these people inking with brushes and ink just as you're using?
I think brush inking is pretty universal for comics. And it took me a long time to get into it because it's just hard. Brushes are fucking hard. And I'm not very good with them still. But once you can get good at it, it's such a huge difference. And
the pressure, like that's the weird thing when you're like the nuance. I don't know if you call it like the fine motor skills required to like take one brush and make very thin line, or like apply just the tiniest bit of pressure to like
I can't
make it
do
totally
it.
different.
That's my biggest weakness. It's so hard.
I spent most of the day looking up Jim Woodring drawings. Have you seen his work? Jim Woodring?
Yes. Oh my god.
He does.
That guy's a brush expert.
He does a lot of he uses I thought it was brush, and he uses
nibs.
Nibs, yeah, he uses metal nibs, and he buys these special ones from Germany, and so he could like again have a thin line and like apply pressure and make it thick. But if you've never used a nib before, like you could destroy an entire drawing if you have one little tiny drop of ink fall off of it. You're basically just using like meniscus is the only thing stopping you from complete disaster.
That's cool because I always assumed he used a brush, but that makes so much sense. Nib is the other thing. So nibs and brushes, I cannot. Nibs are a mystery to me. I don't understand them. Don't know how they work. Jim Woodring though is a legit expert craftsman. Like his lines are perfect. It's his like
truthfully incredible.
I remember like at Comic Arts Brooklyn like 3 or 4 years ago, he did a presentation where someone made him like a giant novelty brush, like the size of a mop, and he like painted a wall with it like this. But like his lines were still perfect. It's this giant fucking brush, and he still had perfect line quality.
His level of craft is amazing. And what I also found fantastic was like his career in a way is like hugely supported by Fantagraphics books. So I don't know anything about Fantagraphics. I know Ed Pisker's book is printed by them, and so is Jim Woodring's stuff. So is Fantagraphics, is this a publisher of kind of more like avant-garde, or I don't know what this, it's definitely it's considered like independent?
Let me grab something real quick. Fantagraphics, this is all Fantagraphics right here. All these Daniel Klaus. When I was talking about the 80s like avant-garde boom that came out with like Raw magazine, at the same time the Comics Journal came out, which was like the first comics criticism magazine.
Okay.
And the guys who did that founded Fantagraphics, and their flagship title was Love and Rockets. They also went on to publish 8 Ball. They kind of are the masthead of like 90s indie movement, and they've published, in my opinion, the best comics ever made. Basically, they're like the kings of like modern avant-garde, and they're widely considered like the best publisher that's existed. A lot of people today currently will like argue that they've fallen off or not. I don't know, but they did everything Daniel Klaus ever did, and those are some of the best comics ever made. So I can't complain. Yeah, if I could get published by Fantagraphics, that would be my dream publisher.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. And to know that there's publishers out there that are willing, to let guys work on books for, I shouldn't say guys, people to work on books for months or years sometimes, and then publish them. It's fantastic. I mean, we were just talking about Jim Woodring, who's sitting there with metal nibs. He like sounds like he throws out more drawings than he keeps. If a publisher is willing to sit by that level of craft, like that's pretty badass. I definitely got to respect that.
And they're a success story because they're not like, they're not like starving artists. Like they made it. They've brought that avant-garde scene, and they've made it.
I think you're touching your touching your microphone.
Oh shit! Sorry.
Oh, it's all good.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, what were you saying? Yeah.
They've kind of made it more known. Like they took a lot of artists who were self-publishing, and they brought them into more of the, not quite mainstream, but more of a more visible area.
So one thing I like to talk about in this show is like how artists basically, get into galleries or get themselves published. I think it's something a lot of artists want to know. And so is this kind of a common path for comic book creators? They self-publish and just like share and sell and hopefully try to get picked up by a publisher?
I feel like it is. I forever, and I didn't publish my first self-published comic until I was like 26. I forever just wanted to get in somewhere. Like I wanted a pulp to be published. I wanted to be in an anthology, et cetera, et cetera. I was always submitting comics. And then it actually wasn't until I saw Cartoonist Kayfabe, and they talked about how they all got their start self-publishing. And they also went through every indie comic book artist, and they all got their start self-publishing. And Ed said something about how a publisher wants to see that you've completed and put something out. And that made me realize that, like, fuck it, I'm not going to wait around my whole life for somebody else to validate me. I'll just start putting out my own comics. And that, like, inspired me to then self-publish my first comic, Softer Than Sunshine, which then led down the road to Vacuum Decay. Since putting out Vacuum Decay, I have realized that everybody self-publishes, especially right now with Instagram and just the internet being what it is. It's like easier than ever to promote yourself and to find an audience for self-published work. And I mean, since the 80s, self-publishing has been a successful thing, but it wasn't until very recently that I realized that it was the way to go for me. And I'm not like rich and famous, but I've found it to be successful. I think it works, and it works. I could have just sat around waiting my whole life to get an email from Fantagraphics, but it wasn't going to happen. So I had to do it myself. And it's expensive, and it's painful, and it takes a lot of work, but it's worth it.
Yeah, I think one thing that's been ringing true for me after talking to a handful of artists is finding your niche is important, and also like your context. And people collect comics. People love and collect the work surrounding comics. And there's a lot of different kind of works and kind of people that go into making them. And it's definitely an angle that I'm certainly interested in, and it's something that I didn't unearth until recently. I was like, oh man, this is like what made me want to be an artist. I was journaling. I'm just ranting right now, but
No, yeah.
H.R. Geiger's Alien was what made me want to become an artist. And
Really, that's right.
yeah, and over the years have been I started collaging about 5 years ago, when I knew I needed to like kind of rein in my ADD and like just stick to one thing. And it's been great. I've been learning a lot. And then like just a few months ago, I was lamenting. I was like, I want to make monsters. Like I want to make creepy monsters. That's what made me want to become an artist. How do I do that? And that's what got me back into the comics. So that's why I'm making these comic monsters. So you're self-publishing, but you're also curating too, because your current project, Vacuum Decay, each issue has multiple artists in it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, about 7 or 8.
So how do you kind of choose your artists? What do you look for? What makes a good comic to you? Like, I don't know. That's kind of a loaded question, but let's talk about how you find your artist first.
Well, for issue 1, I started with people so it was really my friend Carmichael was a guy. He lived in San Francisco for a while. We would hang out and talk about comics at the shop, and I'd always wanted to do a horror anthology. So it wasn't until hanging out with him. He's another guy who's really into indie horror comics and also wanted to make like indie fucked up comics. Whereas a lot of my other comic book friends have very different tastes than me. Like I have a lot of friends who are cartoonists, but some of them are like into more imagey stuff. One of my friends is like really into manga. And he was the first guy where I'm like, he wants to do black and white underground comics. I want to do black and white underground comics. Let's like do something together. And so I reached out to a bunch of people who I knew and liked from like Instagram, or people I knew in person, like Jose Angelos, who did the back cover for issue 1. But then I also took a couple shots in the dark and like sent out some emails and DMs to people who were like more established. And I wasn't sure if they would respond or be interested. But I mean, Mike Diana, who is in issue 1, was a guy who I didn't think would. Down.
Oh, I think you got your thumb on your microphone or something.
Shit.
Are you on a laptop? Are you on a laptop?
Yeah, I am. I gotta not touch the base.
Yeah, there might be some. There's probably a little tiny microphone you can't even see somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's on the bottom here. And every time. Okay, sorry. Where did I cut out?
Mike Diana.
Right. So I emailed him, or I messaged him out of the blue, and he was on board. And it was funny because he actually, like, at the same time I was messaging him, there was a documentary about him coming out. So I can't imagine that he wasn't incredibly busy, but he found time to make a comic for Vacuum Decay issue 1. And so like I've gotten people who are way above. I got Josh Simmons did the back page for issue 3. So I've gotten people who are like way above my level to show an interest and contribute. In upcoming issue 4, I have Joaquin Drescher, who's a really successful and really great cartoonist, and he was on board to give me some pages. So,
awesome.
A lot of them are people I know who are on like the same level as me, who I admire their art and I think they're doing a good job. And then occasionally I get lucky and I get like some bigger names that are, willing to give me the time of day.
So did a lot of that communication start on Instagram?
Mostly. That's the only social media I use, and that's like the platform where I find other indie cartoonists, people in my same bracket.
Yeah, I think if you're a visual artist and you're not on Instagram, it's just silly. It's like a portfolio that you could like talk to people with. It's
really, it can be really demoralizing, and it can be soulless, but I feel like it's a necessary evil.
Yeah, 100%. And like I'm not saying that people have to go on some like Instagram. Like I'm not saying you have to necessarily Google how to get followers and stuff like that. Because like if someone you could see it and that when someone DMs you, say, oh, who's this guy? Oh man, this work is really great. Sometimes that's all you need, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So that's good to know, for the listeners, that a lot of these conversations for you started on Instagram, and you also at the comic book shop, and you reached out to people that, you know, maybe you felt was like more like risky, for your artist ego to be like, I don't know, can I ask so and so? Will they, if he says no, will it hurt me? At least
Yeah.
that's how I would think.
I've asked a lot of people who've said no, but now it's like I expected them to say no. It's like that's totally fine. Like I'm not offended. It's like you're too good for my little self-published comics. I'm not. That's okay. I've also had a lot of people submit since the first issue came out, which I'm not really taking submissions. I'm more curating myself. But a few people have sent me comics that I've been like, oh shit, like this is really impressive. Like this is, you know, something I want. I've also had to reject some people, which never feels good. But I'm very particular about what Vacuum Decay is, and I don't want to like compromise on that.
Well, you mentioned earlier like outsider art, and it's actually one of my favorite things about some indie comics. Is like one of the first ones I bought for collecting and not cutting up was this comic where I could tell this cat was just been drawing like jacked action dudes for like 20 years.
Oh yeah.
And like the proportions aren't right or anything. The background's really squeezed in, but I'm like, this is awesome, right? So sometimes
Do you
it's
know
not
what it
just
was?
about skill, it's about flavor. I can't remember. It had, you know, Eliminators, Terminator, it was some kind of inator,
Right.
you know, like
Oh yeah.
some kind of aider. But again, like I think context, one thing I'm learning is context is key, you know. Just because Harry's doesn't think your comic is right for Vacuum Decay doesn't mean it can't be right for somebody else making something either. So speaking of giant genres of comics, I don't know, were we speaking about that? I don't know. Anyway, the next thing I wanted to talk to you about was Jack Kirby.
Yeah, sick.
So I didn't know this. Years ago, I bought one of those reprints of Fantastic Four to read with my kids, and I'm reading through it, and it's growing on me, and I'm really enjoying it. And I noticed this kind of foggy collage picture in there, and the collage artist said to me, said, "Okay, well that's a collage," and I just wasn't quite sure what it was. And then I found out like a month ago that Jack Kirby is like arguably one of the most influential comic book artists of all time. And during the 60s, when he was presumably trying to get trippier and also save time with this crazy busy schedule, he was making whole page collages in some very popular comic books.
Yeah, his collage pages are incredible. I mean, he's an unmitigated genius, like anybody will tell you that. But he also like pushed the envelope in bringing new media in. And his putting collage pages in a superhero comic is like a really weird thing to do, and it looks so sick.
And the superheroes we're talking about, for those who don't know, this isn't just like some random superhero. We're talking about Fantastic Four, Thor.
Yeah, in his
Superman.
DC, like he did like a Superman comic with collage.
Yeah, he did Superman. He did DC and Marvel, and like the giants of those categories too. So he'd often use collage because it's such a change in texture and style when they traveled to a different planet or there was some weird like dimensional shift, right? One of the cooler collages is like a planet with a face. It's like a living planet. So it looks like this cratered moon, Ego, with this big face on it. Quick technical question. How the heck did they color those? Because he would just make a black and white collage from things like, looks like he just cut up Life magazine. How
so the coloring back then? The coloring is what they call the 4-color process. I don't fully have a grasp on how it works. I think it's like equivalent to like
you don't have to answer
screen printing thing. Well, I'll tell you this: they had though like sheets of colors that they could make. So like DC would have like these are the 30 colors that DC has, and these are like the 25 colors that Marvel has, and you would pick them out and then like label a spot. So you can find the sheets if you Google like classic DC colors. You can find like one of those sheets. And you'd be like, okay, there's like 5 shades of pink. I'll pick this pink. There's like 4 shades of, grayish blue. I'll pick this blue. And you like annotate, like there'll be like a letter. So it'd be like Q3. That's like a shade of red, and you like write that in the spot, and then et cetera. And then the colorist, either the penciler can shoot, like Jack Kirby, I think he chose his own colors, but sometimes the colorist's whole job is to do that. And then you can see, if you look at like old Spider-Man, there's times when they fuck up and like, you know, his hand is the color of the suit instead of et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So the color was then is annotated, and then the colors apply a color. Was that like a liquid, or was that like a transparent sheet?
No, it's like ink printed. It's like printed ink. It's
Okay.
kind of like screen printing. They would like make essentially stencils and then like print them.
Oh, so no one sat there and colored it. It was actually part of like the manufacturing process.
Yeah, it was like a early form of printing.
Whoa.
Color printing.
Whoa.
And they call them color separations because you would make like, much like screen printing, there'd be layers of different. Yeah. I might be getting details wrong here, but like that's basically
certainly close enough. Yeah, I just took a risograph workshop, and I had to separate. That's basically kind of a mini version of almost what you're talking about, right? That's risography is really neat. It's basically a machine that it prints, and when it does, it looks like it's been screen printed. But the cool thing about it is, if you want to make a lot of something, it could like screen print pink, and you'll get like something insane, like 600 prints a minute or something absolutely bonkers. And you have to separate the color. So I actually made a completely, I'll show you. I made a, this is my,
sick.
It's on Comic Panel. I made a black and white collage, and then
that's rad.
Thanks. Yeah. Basically it's going to be a black and yellow, and I had to separate it in Photoshop into two like different color layers, and they're printing it at Color Code Printing in Toronto right now, probably. Okay, so that's how they would separate that. Okay, that's a huge mystery. I did not know how the heck they were coloring those collages in particular, because I was like, how could a colorist like take a marker or paint and color on top of a printed photograph? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you look, you'll notice they're all like flat colors, you know?
Yeah. And that's what the inking was for, right? To show like the three-dimensional, you know.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. So you introduced me to Al Columbia. This is another a black and white indie comic book artist. Do I got that right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's like if Popeye's children were stuck in like Nosferatu film. That's how I would describe.
Yeah, it's very much like a horror reimagining of the Fleischer Brothers.
Okay. Yeah. And I don't want to say it's similar to Jim Woodring, but there's this kind of similarity in that it's like these like 1920s or 30s comics.
Mm-hmm.
They're influenced.
And they both came up in the same scene. They both came up in the 90s Fantagraphic scene. They were both in 000 magazine. So they're definitely like, you know, in the same genre.
And so R. Crumb, he was before that? He was more like 60s.
Yeah, he was like 60s, 70s, and this is like 90s.
Did R. Crumb do illustrations for like the Grateful Dead and stuff like that too?
I don't know about the Dead specifically, but he did the famous Janis Joplin album cover. Okay. And the Cream magazine logo. He was very in the San Francisco psychedelic rock scene. He did a lot of show flyers. It's funny, he hated all that music, but he did a lot of art for it.
And it's funny, I was listening to an interview with him where I think earlier we were kind of addressing people kind of turning their noses up at comics as like, you know, being an art form. And even amongst R. Crumb was saying, even amongst like the psychedelic 60s, when he was making his work, people, even the hippies looked at it and said, oh man, that looks like comic books, because it wasn't all like flowy, you know, like a Deep Purple or a Jimi Hendrix poster. It even took the hippies a while to accept his work. I can see that. Strange as it is. So another thing I wanted to talk about was tablets and like the wide use of like Procreate and stuff like that. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you, like, is webcomic, is that still a thing? I hear that term like.
I think so. I mean, I frankly wouldn't know. I think so. I mean, there's people who all of a sudden are famous cartoonists that I've never heard of, and they're from web comics. There are people who get big on doing swipeable Instagram comics. That's the closest thing I can think of. Like Simon Hanselman did Crisis Zone, which was a swipeable thing that ran the entire like pandemic lockdown from start to finish, which was pretty wild. But that's the closest thing that I'm aware of. I know that like blog web comics are huge for certain demographics, but it's never been something I've been super aware of.
Would most web comics, just for ease, probably be made on tablets like iPads?
Most web comics that I've seen, I'm going to get a little spicy here. Most web comics that I've seen look like absolute shit. And that's because they are predominantly fully digital, done incredibly quickly, just all little, Procreate tablet nonsense, shit that I can't stand.
And there are ways to make Procreate and Photoshop look like old paper. Like I know like I'm assuming, I don't want to name any names, but I follow some digital collage artists who make like badass stuff with like old Tarzan covers and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely digital, but there's also ways to take like texture brushes and stuff to take completely new computer drawings and make them look like old paper and stuff to the untrained eye, right? Texture brushes and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's some of that stuff's good. I sometimes, when I make posters, will add like an old like paper, old printing quality filters digitally. I definitely do a lot of digital colors. I am adamantly, vigilantly against digital inking. That's my big sticking point.
Yeah.
You can always tell. You can never fool anybody. It's just so obvious when something has been inked digitally. Same with digital text. I had somebody submit a comic for Vaccum Decay that had digital text, and I made them redo the lettering by hand because I have a goal or a rule that everything in Vaccum Decay is done by hand. No digital inks, no digital letters. Sometimes like screen tone textures, sometimes like some darkening textures. People edit their shit digitally, that's fine, but I'm a big believer in traditional process.
Sure, yeah. For whatever reason, I can't pick up the digital stuff myself. Some of the webcomic stuff that I think I've seen, like I think it's okay, like for quick little cartoony like conversation stuff or whatever. Like I'm like, okay, that's all right. But yeah, when it comes to like picking up an actual comic book, like most seems to be made digitally, and I just can't get into it. I don't know if it's an awkward time or what. Now it kind of looks like a lot of comics, even though they're drawn completely differently, they kind of look like those Image comics that we were kind of bashing earlier. Was that Image comic, was that really early Photoshop and Corel Draw, or were those markers? How were those guys making those?
So it was definitely not markers. I don't know exactly what it was, but they were definitely inking by hand. But that was the part where these like digital gradients came in, and you see gradients. These like metal textures and these white highlights that fade in and fade out, and it's crazy ugly. Like I can't imagine why they thought that looked good. And I guess when I was a kid, it's like appealing, but as an adult, if you look at it, it looks like it's just gross, man. And it's such a difference between the way things used to look. Let me find an example.
Yeah, while you're looking, I think from what I understand with this like speculator boom, Spawn was huge and stuff, and there was just this race to create these big badass looking characters. Yeah,
like look at that.
Yeah,
look at that compared to this.
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
These are the flat traditional colors versus these like imitation 3D is what I call it.
It's like a hyper real. It's like when you see a picture for like a billboard for like a cheeseburger advertisement, and you can see that like the very edge of the tomato has been like sprayed with fine water, so you see like droplets, and you're like, oh, it's a fresh tomato.
Or like when you see a picture of like a magazine model and her face has been airbrushed and like painted over, and it's just like it's perfect, but it's so fake.
Yeah, I can't do my heart goes out to anyone who works in retail because they always play auto tune in those stores,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I just don't
Similar
see
to
how that's
that.
good
Yeah.
for the human. I just don't see how that's good for the human soul. Like I have a 5-year-old daughter. It's like, do I really want my daughter like growing up listening to auto tune human
Mm,
voices and think that's what a pretty voice sounds like? I
yeah. It's
I
rough.
couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
It's also like when I do color things digitally, which I do pretty often, I always try to use flat colors. And I think like flat is the way to go if you're doing digital colors. I think those gradients, that fake texture, that fake 3D, I think it's just really unappealing.
Um, yeah, I personally can't get into it at all. It's it's funny because I'm at this crossroads myself where an art quote that I loved and helped me as an artist. Andy Warhol said, "Art should be quick." And at the time, I was obsessing with more traditional artists. Like Alex Gray was another big influence on me when I was in college. So, are you familiar with his work? He did
I
the
don't think so.
he did the Tool album covers where like it shows the
Oh, sure,
human
sure, sure.
anatomy and like the spiritual chakras and all that stuff. Spiritual chakras, it's funny. But I was like, oh my God, I'll never be able to do this. Alex Gray, he's this like, he literally trained to be a medical illustrator. And he's had some kind of spiritual awakening where he can kind of like does a really good job showing these like chakras and spiritual energies and mysticism. It was crippling. And then I read Andy Warhol. He said, art should be quick. And I was like, hell yeah, it's okay. Art can be quick. So in my own career, I've been trying to embrace the quickness. Like I embraced the shit out
Mm.
of TikTok when that first went, and I exploded on TikTok. I've got like a few videos with 7 million views. And if the part of me
Damn.
like that, like, yeah, it was pretty neato. The part of me that was just like, all right, I'm making collages for 1-minute videos. Let's see what happens. And my
Yeah.
process and everything reflected that. And the more people I talk to, whose art I appreciate on this podcast, everyone's taking a lot of time to make their work, and they're just confidently sitting back and plugging away. And I'm learning that these comics seem to take a really long time to make, right? I mean, if you have helpers and
Oh, yeah.
stuff, even what, even if someone like Marvel, 1 month is working around the clock with a bunch of people is like even a lot for them, right?
Yeah, and back in the day, they would have, obviously, everybody had a job, penciler. It was like a assembly line, so they could pump out multiple issues a month. In the Eisner Iger studio, they had like one guy did faces, one guy did backgrounds, etc. And then that's the way it is currently in manga too. I do everything by myself, and you can see this is my 20-page comic I just finished, and it took me 5 freaking months. It should not have taken me that long, and it's just because I'm very slow, and also I work a full-time job, and et cetera. But like, I can't imagine doing that monthly. Doing like a monthly comic seems to be the most like crippling thing I could picture. And like that's the professional level is a page a day. That's what people say. Professional rate is page a day, and that seems like
penciled and inked.
Well, that's the thing, is that it's like it's undefined. So in Jack Kirby's day, he did 4 pages a day. People, there's like, oh, legendary day when Jack Kirby did 10 pages. Like, yeah, he's only penciling. He's not doing any lettering or inking, which I'm not taking away from. Obviously, his pencils are incredible, but I'm just saying it's different when you do different aspects of it. So for me to do all the inking and lettering and ruling it out and doing thumbnails and also writing the script, like, I can give myself a little bit of leeway for it taking longer. I still would like to be at a place where I'm doing a page a day, but that's not yet. There are good weeks where I do a page a day. But
that's a whole other can of worms, is scripting and like coming up with a story in the first place. So there's
exactly.
There's writing involved, and that's a whole other, I feel like
that's a lot easier to me.
The writing.
Yeah, I feel like that's just way easier. It's not a physical skill. It's just like a mental skill. But then the drawing is like so much labor, and I have so little confidence.
The more I'm learning about comics, and the more I'm learning about writing and drawing, because I purposely didn't let myself draw for about 5 years. Part of my Red Wizard project was like, you're not drawing, you're not painting, despite having done a lot of that. drawing and writing seem to be similar crafts in that you gotta kind of do it a little bit every day in order to
I try
not
to.
get
If I
rusty.
don't draw, I not get rusty. I also get depressed. It's also drawing begets more drawing. If I do a lot of drawing in a day, I then have like, I'm warmed up and I have confidence, and then I like am able to motivate myself to draw more. It's like like a snowball effect. And then if I don't draw for a long time, I have no confidence and I like don't believe in myself, and then I don't want to draw. So I really try to draw every day now. Currently, it took me a long time to get there, but I really want to try to draw every day. Otherwise, I get genuinely depressed if I don't draw.
No, I feel that. I get bummed out if I'm not making my work either. And then there's also, and to me, in a way that they're similar, is that there's this whole observation element where, like, if you're trying to write a story, like you need to kind of be vigilant with what you're doing, and you need to listen, and you need to look, and you need to translate that into words. And drawing is very similar, especially when you're starting to cartoon. It's like it's listening, and it's observing, and it's translating your experience. I guess they're both done with pen in a way, right?
For me, I still use references. I mean, I have to look at a person to draw a person well. Like, I'm not good enough at anatomy that I can just build figures in my brain.
Sure.
And even when I'm looking at references, my anatomy still isn't good. But I'm still very much stuck in the observe and report phase, where I'm not at the level where it can all come from my brain.
Yeah, I had this aha moment, and tell me if this is stupid, but I was like, my daughter went to my parents' house. I still have all my old toys and stuff in the basement, and she brought home it was like a panther xenomorph. I didn't even remember like I owned this thing. It was back in the 90s. They made like a xenomorph for like every single animal like a facehugger could have gotten.
Oh yes.
And she brought this thing home, and I've been thinking a lot about Giger, because I'm kind of going back to my roots lately. And I was like, oh, the panther alien. You know what? What if I just took my old action figures, set them up like I used to when I was little fighting, and then use that as a reference and draw that?
That's how fucking Alex Ross does it.
Is it really?
Yeah, he uses fucking action figures, and he sometimes forgets to not put the joint breaks in. You can he's just painting action figures.
That's fantastic. Oh my god. Yeah. Okay, so it's not a dumb idea. Great.
No, and also, I mean, Tom Scioli, who you might know from the Kayfabe channel, he's a really great cartoonist, and he did a G.I. Joe Transformers comic where it was very clear that he had all the toys out the whole time he was drawing. And that's like part of what makes it good. Like it feels like someone playing with their toys, but in the form of art.
That's really sick.
Yeah, and same with, he did a GoBots comic that's incredible. That's a similar vibe.
He did a GoBots too?
He did a GoBots comic that fucking rules, and you can tell that he's just he owns every GoBot, and he'll just pose them and draw it, and pose them and draw it.
Have you ever read that the book Understanding Comics?
I've never read the whole thing, but I've read parts of it, chunks of it.
There's the part I'm still working on it. The part that really stuck with me is he kind of made this pyramid of like styles of cartooning, and it
I remember that page. Yeah,
it goes from like abstract to like very real. Like the most abstract would be like the have a nice day smiley face. Everyone understands is like that's like the bare minimum as a human face, and then down to just like a very realistic drawing would be like it's like the bottom of the pyramid. I'm totally messing this up, but
no, that's, you summed it up.
One thing that stuck with me that all of a sudden made me feel that like comics were much more smarter than I was giving them credit for is like the more like a minimal a comic faces, the more multiple people can what's the word
relate
relate to, right? So like the smiley face, like everyone in the world gets, it's like an emoji, right? Like you could just make the puke emoji face and everyone's like, oh yeah, I've puked before too, but as soon as you make it look like Red Wizard or Harry Nordlinger puking, then it's like, oh, he's puking. It's not like me.
It's a distancing.
Yeah. So once I saw, oh, is that a collie? Is that a collie shirt you're wearing?
Yeah, it's Snoopy as collie.
There you go, man.
Yeah.
We're talking about universality.
Really
yeah, that's awesome. So it hit me all of a sudden. It was like, wow, people love The Simpsons because like we all see our like Homer Simpson as like our dad, or us ourselves as Bart.
So like the nature of cartoon, you know, as an idea is like a simple palette that you can express anything into.
Yes. And and he's the author of Understanding Comics said the more I'm fucking butchering this, the more like simple the comic illustrations are, maybe the more interested you are in ideas, whereas like the more detailed you might be more interested in like the subject. So like
he had a really interesting thing about how we try to see faces in everything.
Yeah.
And so we're constantly trying to see a human face. That's why we see a face in an outlet or whatever.
Yeah.
And that then translates into a smiley face.
Sure, 100%. Yeah, that's one of my favorite metaphors for living in life is that, but it's a tree stump. It's a burglar runs into a park at night, and he sees this like figure. It looks like a man like leaning on a lamppost, and he runs away because he thinks it's a police officer. And then a lover goes into the park, and he is supposed to be meeting up with his girlfriend, and he sees the same figure leaning up against the stand, and he thinks that it's his girlfriend. And he gets closer to it, and it's like a dead tree log that's like, it's like a dead tree.
Yeah.
Part of a dead tree. And so like depending on like what you're projecting is like what you're going to see. I don't know why I mentioned that, but
no, that's great.
Yeah.
That's a great metaphor for art in general.
Yeah, I do think so. It's all about trying to like understand. I think art's trying to be about understanding ourselves more, and like the world and people. I think the early cavemen, before they could make art, were collecting pebbles that looked like faces.
Sounds sick. That sounds what I would want to do if I was a caveman.
Oh, look at this one. Yeah. I think they would find in the caves, they would find like
there's also those crabs in Japan that have like a samurai face on them, and they are now the like dominant crab species in this certain place because people picked them over other crabs and would like breed them because they had like a human-like design on their shells.
That's wild.
I got that from the Cosmos, Carl Sagan's Cosmos. I might have totally butchered that, but
oh yeah, where's it? Yeah, we're all paraphrasing here. Yeah, that's well, I think we had an awesome convo. I'm trying to go over my questions, see if I forgot anything. Let's see here. Yes. So, is there any? Where could people please plug anything that you want, and where can people find? Where could they pick up an issue of Vacuum Decay, and how could they find out more about your work?
Awesome. Well, so I have Vacuum Decay issues 1, 2, and 3 are out right now. You can get these at vacuumdecay.com. You can also find me at harrynordlinger.com. Also, these are free online. You can read these for free on the website. So Sweet. They're for everybody. If you want a physical copy, you can get them on the website as well. Issue 4 will be out in hopefully 2 weeks. I'll post more info about that. But that's it, man. I just, Vacuum Decay is my number one thing. So check it out, please.
Well, I wish you the best of luck. Your comics are awesome.
Yeah, man.
I'm definitely looking forward to issue 4 for sure.
Fuck yeah. Thank you so much. This is great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners are going to learn a lot as well. So thank you so much.
Hell yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, man. I'll see you later.
All right.